All right. So, Matt, did you hear about the recent coal mine collapse that happened?
No, I didn't hear about it recently.
Yeah. Well, recently it happened, but everybody escaped okay. You know, nobody was injured or anything. It was just a minor inconvenience.
That took me a minute. I'm ashamed to say.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the graveyard. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Adam.
And my name's Matt.
Now, pull up a tombstone or settle into your casket and get comfortable because this is Graveyard Tales. All right, everybody, here we are again. Matt, how you doing tonight, brother?
I am good.
Good.
It's been a crazy week already.
Yes, it has. It's only Wednesday.
It's good. It's good to be here.
Right.
This has become my normal now.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a safe space, you know.
Being here, you know, in front of the mic in the graveyard, it feels more normal now than the world does. No joke. It's crazy when you go out those doors. So, Ashley has been doing like a summer school thing for Michael. She's killing it, man. I'm proud of her, and she's hard working. She developed this whole summer school thing for him to do to, you know, keep him busy since there's no summer camps to send him to or anything like that. So she was printing stuff out today on the printer here, and I didn't realize it, and I started printing my notes. So part of my notes is on construction paper. So if you hear a like louder crumple, it's because it's construction paper. It's like you're printing cue cards or something.
Yeah, exactly. But I walked out and I was like, I think I wasted your construction paper. So real quick, before we get into it, we want to thank Podbelly. Go to podbelly.com to find other shows that you might enjoy and to learn how to podcast if you're interested in podcasting. Everybody's podcasting now. So if you want to learn and you want to learn the best way to do it, go to podbelly.com and check out the information there. We would also like to thank tonight's sponsor, AMC Shutter, and we will talk about them more coming up in just a little bit. But we wanted to hit on this real quick. There's that buffalo running through the neighborhood again, my neighbor. We still have a live show July 18th. So when this episode drops, it'll be like a little over a month away. And we've talked with Jerry and Tracy from Hillbilly Horror Stories, who's putting on the show, and the venue itself is going to be open, and we are going to lower the amount of tickets that's available. So if you haven't gotten a ticket, go ahead and grab it because there's not as many available. We lowered the amount so that we could socially distance during the live event here. And, you know, I would say if you're thinking about coming, go ahead and come because we're going to do it responsibly. We're going to do it safely. And, you know, you can wear a mask, whatever you feel comfortable for. So join us July 18th in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee with Hillbilly Horror Stories.
Yeah, I think it's still going to be, a good time, an enjoyable show. We debated back and forth on what we should do. We don't want to be insensitive to what's going on. We just kind of felt like, if we can do this and put it in an environment where you guys would feel comfortable, then we could go forward with it. So look, we understand, what the climate is right now. But maybe getting back to some normal activities will be good for everybody.
But like Adam said, it's going to be set up in a way where, you're not going to be shoved up against, everybody. We're not going to be all crammed into one little space. We're going to have room to be apart from one another and be responsible. And, I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be different, but it's still going to be, fun. So
right.
if you've been on the fence or you've been waiting for us to say yay or nay, here's the yay.
Right.
So,
right. And
all right.
The one thing that we will probably say is what we would normally do with the handshakes and the hugs and, close pictures and stuff like that, probably not going to happen. You're welcome to take pictures. We'll still get in pictures with you and everything, but we don't need to be, high-fiving and handshaking and everything like Matt and I would normally do because, we want to be respectful of that as well. So
right.
Just keep that in mind. And if you want to come, go ahead and come. We're still doing it. The venue is still going to be open. And if anything changes between now and then, we will definitely let you know. And, if the venue says, no, we're not going to do it, then we'll have to refund tickets or we'll reschedule. But we'll let you guys know. We'll keep you abreast of the situation. So on that note, Matt, tell us, what are we talking about tonight, brother?
Okay, so tonight...
Good segue, huh?
It's a Segway of the Year award.
Yeah.
But tonight we're going to talk about something that you may have heard if you like Stephen King novels. You've probably heard this term. But this kind of touches on something that has always kind of been a little bit of an interest to me. I'd heard this term before and I wasn't 100% sure what it was. So I can remember being younger and looking it up just to find out what it is. But we're going to talk about the Tommyknockers.
Right.
And a lot of you are going, what?
Yeah. You're going to do what now?
But yeah, we're going to talk about the Tommyknockers, and there is a Stephen King novel. I think it came out in 1983 of the same name. It's not exactly the same subject matter, but we're gonna hit this, and I think if you've never heard of this, you're gonna be entertained when we tell some of these stories.
Yep, I think so. So we got to get into what is a Tommyknocker and some of the legends and the history and stuff like that. So mining actually is one of the oldest professions out there. It goes back to you can find evidence of mining from Stone Age. They were mining rocks for tools and stuff. So mining is a very old profession, and it's also one of the most dangerous. So naturally, there are a lot of superstitions that arose during the mining boom, and one of those was the Tommyknockers. And we'll talk about whether it's just a superstition or whether there was something actually behind it that kind of got blown out of proportion. And like we always say, go check our show notes down at the bottom if you want to dive more into what we don't cover here. Click those links, you'll see what we're covering, and you can find even more about it. Now, what are Tommyknockers? Well, they are impish, gnome-like men, and the Cornish equivalent, basically, of Irish leprechauns and English brownies. So we've talked about the Fae and
English brownies.
Yeah, and it's made with Earl Grey, and no, just
making
kidding.
me hungry.
But we talked about the Fae, so you if you haven't listened to that, go back and you'll understand what brownies are, not the delicious gooey treat that I now want, but they are a type of Fae. So the Tommyknockers are the Cornish version of that. They come from that area, basically, is where the legend kind of started. Well, the Germans actually called them Berggeister or Bergmannlein.
Closest I can get to
That's pretty good.
being pronounced correctly. But it means mountain ghosts or little miners. Now, the Tommyknocker has been held responsible for both the deaths and the near-death experiences of miners. Now, these impish little creatures have been seen in the deepest parts of mines all over the world. So it's not just one area. These are all over the world. And they've been talked about and seen for centuries. So you can't just say, oh, these are just in England or these are just in Germany or just in America. They're everywhere there is a mine, miners have been discussing the Tommyknockers by one name or another.
Yeah, and the most well-known legends come from, Cornish folklore.
Right.
So that's kind of how they get tagged there. But like Adam said, they're stories of similar little people from all over the world.
And they say when these gnome-like creatures were good, they were thought to bring miners favors and wealth. So they could be good and they could help you out. But when they were bad, they were said to bring about all sorts of misery and injury and death to anyone who doubted their power or who didn't believe in them at all. Now, these highly spirited characters were also known to perform many of the mining duties, working right alongside the men, and they were also being blamed for many of the pranks that were played in the mines, and they were also credited for saving the lives of many miners. So basically, if a hammer went missing, it was the Tommyknockers who had taken it. But if a miner escaped a collapse, the Tommyknockers were given credit for helping him out. So basically anything that happened in the mines...
it was the Tommyknockers' fault.
Yeah, they would contribute it to the Tommyknockers, good or bad.
Good or bad, yeah.
So we got to look at what a Tommyknocker is, and this is according to Ghost Hunt UK. And being that it kind of started over in the UK, most of the legends come out from the UK, we'll say. Thought this was a good source to kind of look at. And they say the Tommyknocker legend is little imp-like creatures that inhabits old mining shafts. The further back you dig, the more chance you have of waking up a sleeping Tommyknocker. They're about 2 feet tall and often described as greenish in color. Now, they look like men and are most often spied wearing traditional miner's outfit. So that would be like coveralls and a little miner's helmet with a light on it. So if you're wanting to picture them in your mind's eye, picture a short little green man with coveralls on and a miner's helmet with a lamp.
Sound kind of cute.
Yeah, they would be something you'd put in a little bassinet and give a bottle to, And then they would crush you beneath the earth.
I'm telling you. They may be little, but, they're magic.
They're a little mean, too. So
that's right.
So living beneath the ground, they have been known to have committed both good and bad deeds through the centuries, like we just talked about, and they earned their names from the miners. They said too often to be coincidence, the miners would hear a knocking coming from deep within the mines, always in a pattern, and then the entire mine would cave in. So they believed that knocking was these Tommyknockers, and it was either them warning you of a cave-in and saying, hey, you need to get out, this thing's about to go, or whatever they were doing was causing this to cave in, depending on your thoughts about the Tommyknockers. So they got, obviously, knockers in the name, Mm-hmm. Now, Matt, I don't want to hear any knocker jokes.
Well, for the Cornish would I guess it's the pronunciation would say it would almost be like knackers.
Yeah.
So I've seen it spelled both ways, but the original is more like a knacker.
Yeah.
Maybe like they're from Boston or something.
Yeah. Tommyknocker.
It's got smart pot.
Yep, and that's exactly what I was thinking. About to say that commercial. It's got smart pot.
He's a Tommyknocker with a smart pack. So now the Cornish actually believed that these little men were the souls of the Crusaders who had crucified Jesus Christ. So they also believed that they were sent by the Romans to work in these tin mines. Now, going along with that theory, the Tommyknockers were said to never be heard on Saturday or during any time of Jewish festivities. And so it makes me think, how would you hear them if you're also not in the mine? You know, if you're taking that holiday, how would you see them? I don't know. And just, it was a weird thing for me to think that they were the ghosts of, you know, Crusaders and that they didn't work on certain holidays. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I guess several hundred years ago, you know, it may not have been such a big deal to work on a Saturday.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you probably worked every day.
Yeah.
You know, there weren't like labor laws and stuff like that. So maybe that's kind of where the Saturday thing comes from.
Yeah.
But I can imagine, you know, that, you know, I don't know how in the world they would put that together, you know. Hey, it's Hanukkah and we don't hear the Tommyknockers.
Yeah. It seems like an embellished thing that
oh yeah,
has gotten embellished over the years, just to fit with a certain ideology.
Yeah. I guess even more strange is this idea that they were the Crusaders who crucified Jesus Christ.
Right.
It was like, wait, that's very specific.
Yeah. How does one correlate with the other? That was my question too. So,
well, it was what I read was it was a punishment.
Yeah.
You know, that they were kind of banished, you know, to have to work in the mine. That's what their souls were punished as.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, is to become a Tommyknocker. But again, you know, with folklore, you're gonna find several different versions that all kind of lead to the same theme.
Mm-hmm.
It's how you get there.
Right. Right.
You know, so
the other thing that might seem a little more close to what they could be is a lot of people say that they are the spirits of dead miners. Some miners believed their former workmates were actually tapping and knocking on the walls of the mines as a warning of danger to tell them to get out. So, you know, that kind of fits a little closer, but here in a minute, I'll talk about why I kind of don't fall in with that one either, honestly. But they say you do not ignore a Tommyknocker, not if you want to live. However, nowhere else in the paranormal world, and this is what I was talking about, nowhere else in the paranormal world have we heard of the ordinary ghost turning into anything but a human spirit after death. So that's why it doesn't really fall in line with me. If you have a dead spirit, if it's the spirit of a dead miner, they are going to be the spirit of a dead miner.
Yeah, then the noises are from ghosts.
Right. And it's not going to turn into a gnome-like creature after they die. So that's why I don't really believe that it's, you know, the spirit of a past miner. I mean, I think if it is something, it's going to be something on its own, a creature of its own realm, not a spirit,
not a former human. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. We'll see.
Adam don't know.
We'll keep digging and we'll figure it out here as we go. Now, the one thing everyone does seem to agree on is that the Tommyknockers are mischievous. So experiences of miners in old shafts report that they eat your lunch, they hide your tools, and they'll knock your hard hat off. They'll pinch you, and they can appear as the spirit of a dead miner. So that may be where it ties in, as they can make themselves look like
a dead miner, but if they are their own thing and they're shape-shifting into this, it doesn't mean that they are a dead miner to begin with.
Yeah.
You know, does that make sense?
Sound more like an older brother.
Yeah, right.
Eat your lunch, knock your hat off.
Pinch you. Yep.
Give you a wedgie.
Yeah, they're just siblings. They're minor siblings down there.
Uh-huh.
Now, they are said first to manifest as little glowing lights, and then a strange mist will take the form of a fallen miner, and then sometimes they will show their true form as the little impish creatures that they are. Well, miners for generations have been leaving out food for the Tommyknockers in order to gain their favor, but there are those who have mocked them as well. And Matt, tell us something about somebody who mocked them.
So this is a famous story from miners in the hills of Smokeshire, or Smokeshire, however, y'all can bash how I pronounce it.
Probably Smokeshire, but
but this story is almost 200 years old, and it tells about a group of 7 miners who were at work when they heard a faint sequence tapping from deep within the mine. Now, 3 of the 7 men laughed and joked, claiming that the Tommyknockers did not exist, and began provoking them, saying like, "Come on then, Tommyknockers, show us what you can do." Now, the other 4 fled. They were like, you don't really want to do that.
probably smart.
Now, those 4 that fled said they actually saw the impish-like creatures running ahead of them, almost like they were leading them to safety, while the mine collapsed. And the 3 who mocked the Tommyknockers died. So that goes back to the whole don't provoke them.
Right.
Which, Adam and I were discussing this before the show, how much they sound like fae. And never could we find anything that really connected them as fae, but it just kind of said they were very similar. And if you recall from our episode on the fae, one of the things you don't want to do is anger them. And offering respect for nature and respect for them and offering gifts was something that you did. And miners did this too for the Tommyknockers to try to stay in their good graces with the belief that if something bad was going to happen while I'm down here in this mine, so many feet underground, if I respect the Tommyknockers, then they could potentially save my life.
Right. And I mean, in a profession that is that dangerous, obviously there's going to be superstitions like that come up, because you don't want to die. You don't want to die down deep in the mines. You want to make it out every day. So anything you can do to help get you out or, protect you in some way, you're going to try. If I was having to go down there, I'd be leaving food for everybody. I don't care who you are. I'd be leaving out offerings, and because you're not getting me down there. I'm sorry. And if you force me down there, I don't know. I'll start praying to anybody that can help me.
It's a hard life. I mean, even now. I mean, to be a miner. I mean, it's a rough way to make a living, and I would imagine that it's safer now, of course, than it was 200 years ago.
Sure.
And technology might make it a little bit easier, but it doesn't mean that it's not dangerous now. And, it's hard work. So, you with a job like that, you begin to build some camaraderie, and, it's almost like being in the military where, look, we're in this dangerous situation, and I'm going to have your back and you're going to have mine.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to develop these little things. It's like, you don't ever do this. Don't ever do that. I remember hearing a story like, you don't was it 3? Yeah, there's a bunch of y'all are going to know this, and I'm going to goof it up, so feel free. But it's something about you don't, 3 on a match or something like that, where where you would light a cigarette if you were down in a bunker or you're hiding, because the time it took to light 3 cigarettes off a single match was enough for a sniper to get a bead on you.
Yep.
Those little things. Now that I imagine that was, there's some fact based in that, but it's one of those things, if you ever met somebody, they were like, oh no, it's bad luck. You don't ever light 3 cigarettes on the same match or something like that. So little things come up when there's danger. And the Tommyknockers is one of those things where, it's like, don't say that, don't act that way, because it's disrespectful to the Tommyknockers and something bad could happen.
Yeah. They'll show you just how rude that really was, Now, there's another theory that says the Tommyknockers would lure people deep into the mining shafts and that you could actually hear them calling you by name, which is scary if you just hear your name being called in a deep mine somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't go.
I wouldn't be able to get out of that fast enough.
Right. Well, also, there's a terrifying theory, they say, that will tell the knocking sounds are actually Tommyknockers knocking away the support beams in the mine. So if you hear the Tommyknockers tapping, they're knocking away the support beams you got holding up the roof. So that would scare me too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now, the Tommyknockers were first heard of in the United States when Cornish miners worked in the western Pennsylvania coal mines in the 1820s. Now, when the California Gold Rush began, these experienced miners were welcomed and often sought after by the mine owners. Now, attempting to recruit more miners, managers often approached the immigrants asking if they had any relatives back in England who might come to work the mines. So, these men ended up forming the core of America's early Western mining workforce. And along with that, their superstitions of the Tommyknockers thrived and spread throughout the mines of the West. Now, in some mines, where the Tommyknockers' presence was known to be overwhelmingly malevolent, the mines were forced to close because of the men's fear of the spirits.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah. So when the mines played out and, people weren't really doing that much mining, just going down in mines, the legend actually continued. And many said that the Tommyknockers found quote-unquote work in the homes surrounding the old mine shafts. So the superstition continued when, a family death or disaster was allegedly foretold by a knocking in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've touched on that before in Poltergeist or something episode. Even the Fae, there was a knocking in the house that you couldn't place, and then one of your family members died or was in an accident, and that apparently was put to Tommyknockers because of these old superstitions from the mines, that the knocking foretold the danger. Now, the belief in these small miners remained well into the 20th century until modern systems and everything took the place of these early superstitions. But not much is heard of the Tommyknockers today, and they will forever have a place in our history, legend, and lore. Now, in 1965, California's mining industry came to a grinding halt, and devout believers, mostly the Cornish descendants, lobbied the general manager of one of California's largest and oldest mines to release the Tommyknockers from employment so that they could be transferred to other working mines in the California area. So the mining company actually agreed to do that. So they, I guess performed a ceremony to release these Tommyknockers to go to other things. But what made me think this the whole time we were doing this research is, are these just old superstitions
that now we don't have a use for, and that's why they've kind of, fallen by the wayside and we don't hear about them much?
Yeah.
Or are these actual entities that lived within these mines, and we just don't pay attention to them now because we're not down there as much? When we are, we've got heavy machinery running, so we don't hear the noises that they make. And, we know, I mean, if you watched the Hellier documentary that I pushed on y'all for several episodes, and if you still haven't watched, I don't know what's going on with you, but they discuss entities in the mines, goblins in the mines. So that ties in my thinking to Tommyknockers, because they're short, small, green people that are mischievous and play tricks. So I think, in my opinion, there is some entity that we don't understand that we have just become too industrialized to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something there. Going back to the connection between Tommyknockers and the Fae, leprechauns, those kind of things. A lot of these stories were developed for a reason. They were meant to keep you safe. They were meant to keep your children safe. Don't do this, or the whatever is gonna get you.
Right.
So it avoided you from swimming in a lake that was dangerous. So there's something that's in that lake that'll pull you to the bottom. It kept you from going out in the woods at night.
Playing in a mine.
Yeah, and the stories they took on a life of their own. But when we begin to think about how do you find creatures like this? How do you connect with gnomes or elves or the Fae or anything like that? We've talked about these in between places, and
the liminal places,
and closing your mind to the outside world, and blocking all the stimulus out so that you can see these things, or at least sense their presence. And as modern technology continues to, pollute our senses with, bells and whistles and just an overload of sounds and visualizations and everything, we don't pay attention to those in between places anymore.
Right.
Or certainly not as much as people did 200-300 years ago. So, if we
miss a lot.
Yeah. If we're talking about mining, Adam makes a very good point. It's all done with heavy machinery now and more technology, and that human aspect of listening for changes, or, being able to sense something's wrong, or temperature differences and little things that might clue a miner in that there's something wrong. They're going to hit a gas pocket, or, there's an underground spring that's going to flood this mine. Those kind of things are detected through technology now. And so our senses are a little dulled.
Sure.
When it comes to that. So, maybe Adam's right. Maybe if these are creatures that really existed and either helped or hindered or both, miners from, centuries ago, well, maybe we don't notice them now. So, I mean, it's definitely food for thought. Okay, Adam, let's take a minute and talk about tonight's sponsor, AMC Networks Shudder. Now, Shudder is a premium video service brought to you by AMC Networks, offering an unbeatable selection of expertly curated horror, supernatural, and thrillers, uncut and commercial-free, with exclusive and original titles you won't find anywhere else. Start your free trial today, risk-free.
I love Shudder, and you can stream great thrillers, horror, and suspense for $5.99 a month or $56.99 a year. That's a great value. Now, Shudder has the largest, fastest growing, human-curated selection of thrilling and dangerous entertainment out there. They are called the Netflix of horror. Now, there are new spine-tingling thrillers, shocking horrors, and edge-of-your-seat suspense added every week. So you got something new every week. Don't think you're going to run out. And you'll have unlimited access to stream ad-free on all your favorite devices.
Yeah, that includes iPhone, iPad, Apple TV, Xbox One, Amazon Fire TV, Google Chromecast, Roku, and so many more. Now, Adam, Amanda and I were subscribers to Shudder long before they were a sponsor of the show.
Right.
We love it. I'm not a huge slasher horror guy, but I love the suspense and the thrillers.
Yeah.
And one of their original shows is based on a book series that Amanda and I love. It's called A Discovery of Witches. It is a fantastic show. You've heard me mention it before right here on Graveyard Tales. But if you haven't checked it out, now is a great time. You're going to get a fantastic value with Shudder, and you can pick up all this original content like Discovery of Witches.
Yeah, it's a great show. After you told me about that, I went and checked it out. Amazing show.
Get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes titles like the acclaimed Tigers Are Not Afraid, One Cut of the Dead, Revenge, and the Creepshow TV series, produced by Greg Nicotero and based on the famous films by George Romero. To try Shudder free for 30 days, go to shudder.com, that's SHUDDER.com, and use the promo code GRAVE.
That's right. To try Shudder for free for 30 days, all you got to do is go to shudder.com, SHUDDER.com, and enter the promo code GRAVE. That's GRAVE. Yeah, I think, like you're saying, we need to, if we're going to look at the Tommyknocker legend, we need to look at it more in the sense of, is this an actual creature? In my opinion. But I don't believe that it's the ghost of expired miners. Now, some noises and some stuff could be. I mean, there's bound to be hauntings in mines and stuff like that, just from how harsh the work was and how many people died. But what they're talking about, they're describing creatures. They're describing little green, miners that are 2-3 foot tall, which sounds a lot like the goblins and stuff that you hear about in, not just Hellier, but in the Kentucky goblin stories and all this, and they live in caves and mine shafts. So yeah. I think the Tommyknockers is just an extension of that other creature. They got their own name. They live, I guess the Tommyknockers in the Cornish legends are basically a relative of whatever goblin we say is in the caves and mines here in the United States. And they just attributed all of the goblins and stuff that they heard here to the Tommyknockers from their legends and from where they're from. And so I think, we'll get into, Matt's about to get into experiences that people have had, but keep that in mind when he goes through that, is think of them not as maybe just a legend or a spirit, but as some actual physical creature that either died off or we've become too industrialized and closed off to see and be aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. But, as Adam, touched on earlier, situations where miners were so superstitious and so afraid of the Tommyknockers that it shut down mines completely. So, I mean, miners worked in constant fear of cave-ins, but the one thing that Welsh and Irish and Cornish miners feared more than the cave-in were the Tommyknockers. These little men were often seen as vengeful and malicious.
Mhm.
And, so the sounds of unexplained voices or unseen hammers clanking or movement in the shadows would scare miners to the point that they would refuse to work, and
Sure.
it would result in the closing of a mine. Now, this was the case of the Mamie-Ar mine near Cripple Creek, Colorado. At least that's what the legend says. Now, unable to convince the Welsh and Cornish miners that the mine was not inhabited by little evil Tommyknockers, the
Good luck with
operators
that.
were, good luck, because I mean this was some deep-seated beliefs here.
Mhm.
The operators were forced to lure less superstitious workers whose desire for wealth was greater than their fear. But soon after, unusual accidents started to happen at the Mamie-Ar mine. Now, 2 of these accidents resulted in the mine being haunted by dead men's spirits. So this is a situation where they're not one and the same. We're talking about a haunted mine, which, the mine outside of Cripple Creek is considered to be a haunted mine, but it was also considered at this time to have an infestation, I guess, of Tommyknockers.
Oh, really?
But as the story goes, one day a miner by the name of Hank Bull, boy, if that isn't a miner's name,
No
I don't know
joke.
what is. Hank Bull.
Mm-hmm.
He's either going to be a miner or a baseball pitcher from the 20s.
Just a tough old dude.
Now, Hank heard what he thought was the voice of a small boy coming from a newly dug tunnel that was still unshored, meaning they had not put up the struts and the boards to hold the ceiling in place.
Right.
So Bull headed down this tunnel, ignoring the warnings of his coworkers, looking for what he thought was a lost child. Now, after a few minutes, the miners heard Bull scream. As they rushed to the tunnel entrance, the unsupported ceiling collapsed on him, killing him.
Yeah.
Now, the story of Bull's accident spread quickly, and several miners left work to go work in what they called less dangerous mines. Now, to me, if a mine collapses, I'm going to be like, I don't think I'm going to go back to work tomorrow.
Right.
This one over here hadn't had a collapse. I'm going to go work over here.
Yeah. This one has supports.
That's right. Now, this left the Mamie-Ar mine with a very minimal crew, and the few miners that remained began to report hearing voices and whispers in areas where there wasn't anyone working. And a few of them reported seeing a dark shape pass by them, only to see it disappear as they watched it. Now, another incident that occurred at the mine involved the mine's windlass. Now, a windlass, and I may be mispronouncing this, it's a type of winch that's used to pull rocks and ore and even men out of the mine. Now, it usually had a large bucket attached to it that would be filled, and then they had a bell attached to it. And so when it was time to bring the bucket up, they would ring the bell 3 times to alert the men at the surface that it was time to start cranking the bucket up.
Sure.
So a lot of times in the Mamie-Ar mine, the bell would ring and the bucket would pull up, but it would be empty. So they couldn't understand, that nobody working down there is going to ring the bell and send up an empty bucket. If you may do that once.
Yeah, and get a good chuckle.
Aha, very funny.
Yeah.
Don't do it again. As you can imagine, cranking this big bucket up on this winch is not something you relish.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like, it's time to crank the bucket. It's like time to make the donuts. It's like, oh my God.
Mm-hmm. I'd rather be bucket cranker though than down in the mines. I'll tell you that.
True. I would probably say if my choice is between bucket cranker and being down there, I'll crank the bucket. I just hope that, Big Joe isn't sitting in the bucket this time.
Right. There's fewer Tommyknockers up here to deal with than.
But this occurred shortly after Hank Bull's death, where in November of 1894, the windlass, the bucket broke loose and it fell. And that was not an uncommon occurrence, but when it fell this time, it fell on a miner's head, crushing his skull. Now, the odd thing about this time is when they investigated it, they couldn't find a logical reason why the bucket fell. The knot on the rope that held the bucket was still intact and tied tightly.
Oh, wow.
So there really wasn't any way they could figure out the bucket came loose.
Yeah.
Now, after this second accident, there was more sightings, and Hank Bull's spirit started to appear in the deeper parts of the mine. Several of the miners who had worked alongside him reported actually seeing him in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the miner who died when the windlass hit him in the head was often seen in the bucket. Miners operating the windlass would spot his crushed head appear just over the top of the bucket. And then when he was seen stepping out of the bucket, he would disappear. And this was actually witnessed more than once. So in December of 1894, pretty much everything came to a head. On Christmas Eve, the mine flooded. So on Christmas Day, the miners were busy hauling out buckets of water. 3 men were turning the windlass up when suddenly it broke, but it did more than break. It actually blew apart, and pieces of it landed everywhere. Now, when it broke, the heavy bucket fell back down into the mine, and one of the 3 men became tangled in the rope that was now loose. And the rope tightened so quickly around his neck that it decapitated him.
Dang.
Can you imagine? Just standing there and all of a sudden this rope just comes up.
Yeah.
Rips your head off. Or just imagine standing next to the guy.
Wild. Yeah. Watching that happen. That is wild.
Yeah. Makes you not want to be the bucket cranker anymore, right?
Yeah. Now I don't want to do any of it.
So
you know what, Matt? I'll keep my job podcasting. How about that?
That's right.
A lot less dangerous.
Fairly safe. I don't see any buckets flying around.
I might get a bloody nose if the mic falls or springs up, but.
Yeah, it's like, it's like I said, mining is a dangerous profession.
Yep.
But this was pretty much, the end of the line for the miners that worked in the Mamie-Ar mine. They all now firmly believed in the idea that the mine had malicious Tommyknockers and that they were the cause for all of these problems and all of these accidents and deaths. So it was originally just the superstitious, but now everyone believed that the Tommyknockers were responsible. The miners left and no other men would work in the Mamie-Ar mine. And in January of 1895, the mine was shut down for good.
Now, see, that makes me think. You talked about 2 different things. You talked about Tommyknockers, the malevolent spirits, and you talked about the ghosts of the dead miners.
Right.
So they are independent from each other, which goes back to my point earlier. I don't believe that the Tommyknockers are human spirits, if that's what you believe ghosts are. I don't believe that's the Tommyknockers.
Right, I'm with you on that point for sure. That it's not that we're not talking about ghosts or dead humans that their spirit somehow transformed into this gnome-like creature. I think we're talking about two different things. And in this story, it absolutely is. And that these, little miners were responsible for the death of several miners and ultimately shutting down the mine.
Right.
Now, this next story was written for the website encounterswiththegoodpeople.com. Now, it's a long title, but this is where you see stories about personal experiences with, gnomes and elves and the fae and things like that. Now, this story was written...
Cool website to check out.
Yeah, this story was written, the artist's name was Galena Bob. Now, it tells of the experiences Bob had with Tommyknockers while working as a tour guide at a historic silver mine in Colorado during the 1990s. So we're not talking about a story that's 200 years old.
Right.
Now,
pretty recent.
I'm gonna read this story out pretty much the way Bob tells it. So I'll be reading it in the first person. Otherwise, it doesn't flow as well. So Bob says, when I first started working at the silver mine tour, I wasn't sure about the Tommyknockers and didn't bother bringing them up. Then one day, I was visiting the gold mine, and the owner offered me a chance to go down into the older parts of the mine far below the level where visitors were normally allowed. With a borrowed helmet and lamp, I descended an old wooden ladder down into the old workings, various levels 100 feet apart, dating back to the 1800s. I was alone, and the only light was the one on my helmet. It was strange, so quiet and hushed, but I wasn't alone. I could feel someone with me, showing me around. It wasn't scary at all. It was a warm feeling. I explored the lower reaches of the mine, then eventually climbed back up to the main level in daylight. After that, I started noticing things like movement in the corners and sounds when I was underground. I read whatever I could to find out about the Tommyknockers, and I started telling visitors about them. Perhaps because I was friendly and respectful, I had few problems with them. Granted, most of the visitors didn't consider the Tommyknockers as much more than an amusing piece of mining folklore. But with most groups, there was usually someone, often a child, who was quite interested. Unfortunately, there were also those, usually adolescent males, who would interrupt me to scoff at such things. I was willing to overlook such rudeness, but the Tommyknockers weren't. Mocking the Tommyknockers when one is underground is very foolish.
Mm-hmm.
When it happened on my tour, someone would get hurt. It was never the rude scoffer, but rather the adult who was with them. It would be minor things like bumping one's head, tripping and falling, scraping one's hand on the rock, but it happened every time. I have no idea why the escorting adult was targeted rather than the young scoffer, but that's what happened. I decided to take action. One day I went back into the mine by myself and respectfully told the Tommyknockers that the scoffers were young, stupid, and ignorant, but hurting people was not acceptable. I knew I couldn't force the Tommyknockers to behave, but I pointed out that I was their friend and asked, was I not always respectful? I told them I could stop telling people about them, however, and that is what I was going to do if the retaliation didn't end. Apparently, they enjoyed being talked about, so there were no more retaliations, at least not on my tours.
That's cool.
Actually, it seemed that at least some of the Tommyknockers enjoyed interacting with the tours. Quite often, when the tales were being told, when the knocking on rocks was mentioned, there would be a knocking on the rocks with uncannily perfect timing from the closed part of the mine.
That's cool.
And he goes on to say that, he had worked with other tour guides who had come up and told him, hey man, you really caused a caused a ruckus with my tour. And he says, what are you talking about? He's like, there's all this Tommyknocker stuff, all that knocking you were doing. Man, it was really freaking my tour visitors, it was freaking them out. And he's like, wasn't me,
wasn't me, dude.
I wasn't down there. I was doing something else. And then he said he was training a new tour guide, and this happened. And they said the new guy looks at him and says, that's pretty cool. Where's the button? And he's like, what button? And he says, the button that makes the knocking sound when you tell the story. And he's like, there's no button. It just happens. So, that's
cool.
I really like stories like this because they're presented in such a way where it's like, it doesn't matter what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just telling you, this is what happens to me. This is what I deal with. I have these, I have these noises and these sounds and these things that happen while I'm giving a tour, and this is how I deal with it. And it continues on. If you want to believe it's something else, fine, but this is what I'm laying out here.
Yeah, I like that, man. That's cool.
Yeah, and so tour guides are great resources because they're there. They're not just telling the stories. They're living them in a certain way because they're there more than anybody else to be able to catch this happen.
Right.
Whether it's to see that apparition that comes down the stairs of a bed and breakfast, to hearing the knocking of the Tommyknockers in a mine on a tour. When you're there that often, you're going to be the one that gets to experience it.
Yep.
And sure, as a tour guide, it makes for a better story, which brings in more customers. But, as Adam, we were talking before the show, I said, how do you get this gig as a tour guide in a mine?
Right.
What makes you go, I think that I could be a really good tour guide at a mine.
What temp agency do you apply for that gets you as a tour guide for a mine?
Sure, I would want to do the best job I can, but, this guy isn't making any extra money because his tour is special and has knocks and stuff. I can't imagine so.
Right.
So he probably doesn't have enough invested in this to really go the extra mile to make this seem as real as possible.
Sure.
And if it's not happening to the other tour guides, then it's not something that's being, it's not something that's being promoted or generated by the company that runs the tour.
Right.
So, like I said, maybe he's making it up. Maybe, but, why?
Why?
What benefit is he given other than just for kicks and giggles,
Yeah, right.
But this whole idea that the Tommyknockers may not be as friendly or as helpful. They're impish in their name. That implies, a prankster or a trickster. And if that means, humans die in a cave in, so be it. They're not human.
Right.
We talked
they don't
about
have the same
again.
respect.
I hate to jump back on this, but it holds true. When we talked about the Fae, the Fae doesn't have this affinity for humans.
Mm-hmm.
Humans are just there. They're the Fae. If they Fae decide to help humans or they decide to hurt humans, it's neither here nor there. Because it would be the same as you squishing an ant. Like, well, I'm not trying to be mean to the ant. The ant's just there, and I'm gonna smush it because I want to, or I'm gonna watch it crawl, or I'm gonna burn it with a magnifying glass, or I'm just gonna leave it alone, or I'm gonna stare at this anthill and watch all these little. When you study the Fae, or when you study gnomes or any of these type creatures. that's kind of the attitude towards humans. You know, you're just kind of there. If you interfere with me, if you disrespect me, I will show you my power. You know?
Otherwise, they're just a toy to them.
That's right. You know, and so that's why I don't think necessarily the Tommyknockers would be evil or benevolent. You know, I think they're just there.
Right.
And
right. I agree.
And whatever happens. And, you know, if humans are helped or if humans are not helped, it doesn't really affect them that much.
Well, and you think, you know, what they say is the deeper you dig, the more likely you are to wake up a Tommyknocker. Okay. So basically what they're saying is you're getting down into their territory, and the Tommyknockers basically are just protecting their territory in a way.
Sure.
You know, it's like, okay, you've come too far. We let you play up there, but now you've come too far. It's like my deal that I have with spiders. If you're outside on my porch, whatever, I'll leave you alone. You come in the house, you're going to have to go.
Yeah.
You know, this is my area, not yours. So they do the same thing. You know, they're like, oh, you've come too far now. Now we need to start chipping away at the support braces and get rid of you, you know?
It makes me think of the doozers on Fraggle Rock.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they didn't want to interact with the Fraggles.
They're
over there doing their construction thing, you know, walking around with their hard hats on. And here are these lunatic creatures with wild hair bouncing around, singing and dancing, you know, knocking over their stuff. And they're like, ugh.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, okay, we got to start over here. You know, it's just like more of a nuisance, you know, than anything else.
Right.
So I gotta think, when I was reading about the Tommyknockers, I thought they're kind of like the doozers from Fraggle Rock.
Pretty much, yeah.
Little dudes, little dudes, hard hats on, you know. But we don't have a ton of stories about actual interactions with the Tommyknocker. They're just not out there. But I was able to find one that might have been an interaction with the Tommyknockers, and it's recent. In 2018, ghost investigator Xavier Hunter decided that he had heard so many tales about a haunted mine just outside of Las Vegas that he had to go and investigate himself. Now, Hunter and his friend Katie entered the mine using a video camera to document their adventure. They reported that inside the mine, they caught the strange smell of rotting meat and would hear the sound of growling coming from deeper in the mine. At one point, they came across some women's clothing, which was odd considering how deep they had actually made it.
That is weird.
Now, as they pushed on, Hunter thought he caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure move ahead of them. Now, at this point, the pair quickly turned and made their way back out of the mine. However, when they later checked the footage, he was shocked to discover a hooded figure lurking in the darkness behind them as they left.
That's creepy.
Now, the video is pretty creepy, and it shows a figure appearing to step backwards into the darkness so as not to be seen by Hunter and Katie. But it still gets caught on the camera as it passes by. Now, Xavier says the presence was malevolent. He says it caused him to become nauseated and dizzy. Now, once he was out of the tunnels, he became sick. But he believes that the figure could have been that of a Tommyknocker. Now, Xavier said he wasn't afraid to enter the mine. He was curious to see if the legends were true. So he went in with an open mind, but he didn't expect to really catch anything.
Right.
He said the figure appeared to be hooded and it was completely black. He said they didn't immediately see it, but saw it after they began to review the video. The odd thing is that around the same time the figure appeared, Xavier began to feel sick and nauseated and actually vomited and said he felt extremely dizzy. Now, he said that they didn't record that moment because Katie was trying to help him figure out what was happening. Well, good. Don't.
Yeah.
If I'm throwing up, don't video me. Do it.
Yeah, please. It's not the time I want to be in front of a camera.
He said he had no idea what it could be, but he supposed that the possible explanation was that it was their own shadow, and that they just kind of creep themselves out. But it was curious because he wondered, why would he have gotten sick right after it appeared? There wasn't really any reason for him to become nauseated. And he said it was right before the figure appeared that they had found the woman's clothing down deep inside the mine. And he said, we were questioning why the clothes would be so deep and who would have left them behind. He said the mine went too deep for the clothes to be left that far in. So it wasn't like somebody had just gone up there and was, messing around or something. And
snuck in, partied.
They're not going to go that far. That's what Xavier is saying. He said, as far as we had made it, somebody that's just up there, messing around, they're not going to get this deep.
Sure.
He said, but he said after that, he said they began to feel, uneasy and weren't sure that they should go any further, but they decided to keep going. And he said he attempted to communicate with dowsing rods and began to hear noises. He said some sounded like growls and some sounded like whispers. Now, again, he reiterates that the presence that they both felt was malevolent. And Katie said that the smell, the rotting meat smell, was what she described as being burning pig flesh.
Oh, weird.
Which is also a very specific smell.
Right.
You kind of got to know what burning pig flesh smells like to describe something as burning pig flesh. So
sure.
So now, after speaking to several locals, Xavier says they pointed him in the direction of the mine and told him some of the legends attached to it. He said, some would say that people would go into the mine to practice witchcraft and that there was a woman who was killed there many years ago. He said another local told me that the mine was cursed and haunted by Tommyknockers that had caused a cave-in where at least one miner had died, and now his restless spirit haunts the mine. So there's another delineation between Tommyknockers and ghosts. Not the same thing. Tommyknockers caused a cave-in and the death of a miner, and now that miner's spirit is trapped in the mine and haunts the mine.
Right.
So, so again, another point that says that these are not ghosts that have been transformed into these little creatures. They are something else, and that oftentimes their actions will cause death. So that's I like that story because it's so recent. I mean, it's within the last couple of years that this occurred, but yet you still get local people that are talking about the legend of the Tommyknockers.
Right. Right.
So it's not dead. This is still something that's around today, even if you don't hear it as often. But it's really fascinating that folklore like that, would have sustained such a life for this length of time, with, local people in, 2018. I mean, I doubt there's any Cornish miners, from, the 1890s still living in that area.
Right. Right. So something's got to be behind it if that is sticking around this long and regenerating new stories. They're not just telling old stories from back in the day. They have had their own experiences. So there's got to be something behind it to me.
Exactly.
I don't know.
And all folklore is based in some type of truth.
Sure.
Whether it's a misinterpreted truth or whether it's, the real truth has been altered slightly, to make it more interesting and to create a legend. There's usually an event or events that will prompt, the storytelling, that turns into folklore. So,
right.
It makes you wonder where did it all begin? Where was the original story? And that was something that I didn't come across. It was one of those things where these miners are just like, it's always been this way.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really what makes a great story. If I can trace it all the way back to its origin sometimes, it makes it harder to believe, because then you start trying to pick apart that origin story.
Sure.
And you start finding inconsistencies and different versions, and it makes it a little less believable. But when it's something that you just like, I don't know, it's just always been this way. It's something my grandmother always said, something my grandfather told me when I was a child, and his grandfather told him, and it's just passed along. And so you never really know, well, how did this all get started? What was there somebody at some point or several people that said, I've seen this, I've experienced it, or I know where these little men come from.
And that's what makes it seem so ancient, like elementals that we've discussed and stuff. It's an ancient entity that, kind of that thing, it has no beginning and it has no end.
Yeah.
It's just always been there.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me a little more, it makes me believe it a little bit more, in the sense of maybe we don't know what it is and we're not describing it correctly in our legends, but there is something there. Like goblins and fae, we don't know where the fae got their start.
Right.
We that's always been around. You look way back when, people have been talking about something that resembles fae, and people have always been talking about something that resembles a Tommyknocker or a goblin or something of that nature. Different names, same entity kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes me put a little more belief in it, and to say that it's not just the spirit of a dead miner, because if it's a new, quote unquote, new mine, and you're, just exploring, where's the dead miner's spirit coming from?
Yeah, exactly.
The first incident in this mine is not going to be a dead miner's spirit.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be something that lives underground. So I feel like it's an ancient entity that's always been there, that is toying with humans, like we discussed a couple minutes ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I don't know. I just wonder what everybody else thinks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of fun, to talk about these kind of creatures. We're not talking about a cryptid where we can debate, is it an undiscovered species? Is it some kind of mythical beast? We're talking about something that, if you believe it could have been there from the beginning of time, or even before.
Right.
Could it be, an earth creature, something that's there to protect the earth?
Exactly. Exactly.
Don't dig this deep. You don't need to be down here. You're damaging, the planet, and these are entities that are there to keep it safe.
Sure.
And protect it. So I love researching these kind of topics, and it's always fun, and it always throws up just a little bit of childlike wonder to just go,
oh, absolutely.
Wouldn't it be amazing to think that beings like this really exist? But, as Adam said, what do you think? Do you believe in creatures like the Tommyknockers, and if you do, what are they doing? What are they there for? What's their purpose? Do you have an idea? If you do, let us know. And social media is a great place to do that. We've had a lot of activity on Twitter as of late. We get a lot of people tweeting us about shows that we've done, places where they have been that we talked about on the show. So let us know, if you've got a minor in your family that's told stories about the Tommyknockers, or maybe you've got
I want to hear that.
Yeah,
man, I want to hear that.
Maybe you've got a family member that that's never talked about it, but you've got someone that you can go, hey, you ever heard a story of the Tommyknockers? I think those kind of things would be just fantastic to hear. So
give them our email. We will talk to them.
Absolutely. And check out our Facebook group. That's where a lot of these discussions happen. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You just have to go and search Graveyard Tales. And while you're on the web, go check out our website. It's graveyardpodcast.com. And on the website, you can listen to the show. You can find links to purchase Graveyard Tales merchandise, and you can become a patron. We've just put out some new Patreon episodes over the last several weeks. We've got some exciting things we're going to try to do there too. So if you've been thinking about pulling the trigger to support the show, go ahead and do it. I think you'll enjoy, what you get. If you haven't already, please go and rate and review us on iTunes. I know we say it every show, but it's so important to help bring us up the rankings, and it allows more people to find us, and it brings more into the graveyard. So until next time, we'll save you a seat in the graveyard.
See you soon.
And he said some people would go into the mind of Patricia. We're getting right down here to the end, and all of a sudden I can't talk.